Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of Calling All Devs, our Q&A series where we take questions from you, the Star Citizen community, and pose them directly to our developers, usually over video conferencing. I'm Jared Huckabee. Let's get right to it. All right, so this question I think is perfect for Ali Brown, our Director of Graphics Engineering. We're going to see what he has to say. Ali, how you doing, man?
I'm good, thanks.
Thank you for taking the call from home. We are, of course, in our work from home era here with all the world stuff going on. So we're gonna jump right into it. I got a question here from a Star Citizen. We've been getting this a lot. Just going to jump right into it. It says, how's work on the Gen 12 Vulcan conversion going? What can you tell us?
So probably we should start explaining what it is before we explain where it is at the moment.
Fair enough.
So yeah, we mentioned two things there. There's the Gen 12 renderer, or Generation 12 renderer, and then there is the fact that it's going to primarily use the Vulkan API. So the Gen 12 is just a name we came up with for our renderer, which is going to utilizing multiple CPU cores more than the previous render, which mainly only runs on 2 CPU cores. Obviously these days we tend to have 8 or 16 cores or more. So and there's a lot of focus on pre-computations so that at runtime it's much faster. So that's type of the Gen 12 renderer. And under the hood, it's going to use the Vulkan graphics API. In fact, initially it's going to use DirectX 11, which is what the current engine uses, and Vulkan. And then once we've got the Vulkan support to be better than the DirectX 11 support, we'll drop DirectX 11 and move fully over to Vulkan. And Vulkan is a more modern API. It's much lighter weight, much faster. It's much closer, a thinner layer of abstraction over what the GPU actually does. So that gives us a lot of performance boost, but it takes a lot more time to program for. So it's a lot more initial investment, but then we get big performance wins once we get over the initial hurdle.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And where are we at?
It's complicated to answer, but so we have a type of multiple mini teams we've set up in the graphics and engine programmer departments, and they're tackling type of 6 separate areas. So I'll talk through each of the 6 and where we're up to. So there is type of the highest level one is the pipeline, render pipeline we're calling it, which is type of the way we structure a frame that we might first we render some shadows, and then we some render to texture work, and then we'll get onto a depth pass, a color pass, then we'll do the UI and such. That type of pipeline is type of the framework that glues it all together. That bit is starting soon, but we haven't actually needed to do that bit first. So that's the first. But that's how you would have imagined we'd start there, but actually it's the opposite. We've started at the other end of the system.
Hey, this is the new reality.
Yeah, that's fine. So at the other end of the system, we have the Vulkan device. This is the lowest level part of it, which is where we actually issue our draw commands to the GPU using the Vulkan API. So that's actually the first thing we started on, at the very lowest level, the most difficult part. And we got a couple of guys just working on that one section alone. And then in another studio, we've got some people looking at the type of the DirectX 11 equivalent, so type of what we're going to use in the meantime while we get this render up and running. And because we already have DirectX 11 support, that's pretty much done. There's not a lot to do there. There's not a lot of concerns. So that section's okay. And then we have like above them both, we have this common layer. So there is differences between DirectX and Vulkan, and by having this type of common layer above, we can type of abstract that and hide that difference, so the higher level rendering code doesn't need to worry about whether it's DirectX or Vulkan. And again, that part of it is pretty much done, and that's not a particularly complicated bit. And then the real work comes down to 2 remaining topics. So we have the post effects, and we have the type of what we're calling the scene submission, the scene rendering. So the post effects is our bloom, our lighting, our all these type of things, like the general effects, and some of the effects that people hate, motion blur and chromatic aberration and them type of ones as well. But the ones that people don't hate so much as well. And then we have that's a big chunk of work, and we have 2 guys just working on that. They're getting quite far. They're quite far through that. I couldn't give a percentage, but they've made very good progress, and they've started with the hardest ones intentionally, so that we prove the system. And then there's going to be a bit of grunt work to get through the more trivial ones afterwards. And then the final big topic is the scene submission, which is getting basically the geometry into the game, into the renderer. So like our shadows and our color pass, and just type of getting all of this geometry very quickly and efficiently into the renderer. And that's probably one of the larger sections, and that's just about started. So at the moment we've got good progress on the Vulcan device, the DirectX 11 device, the common layer that binds them together, and we've made good progress on the post effects. And then the main large areas that are still to be started or to make significant progress is the scene submission and the overall render pipeline that glues it all together. So yeah, that's type of a summary. It's hard to give it like a to give it where does that mean we are.
If this is the timeline, where are we? It's like from beginning to end. We're here.
It's not neither hand.
Yeah.
Somewhere where my head is in the middle.
All right.
I don't know. It's hard to give a. Each of these 6 things are extremely big and complicated in themselves. We have lots of designs. There's endless discussions on each of these topics. So even when programming hasn't started, we can be many weeks into work before we've even got to that stage. So that's progressing well though, and there's a lot of resources dedicated to this internally. A lot.
Well, you could save some time if you just skip the chromatic aberration.
Probably could. It wouldn't be a lot of time.
I won't even get into that argument. Okay, and what are the? Before I let you go, what are you touched on the benefits earlier, but just in a short, I'm looking for the soundbite, I guess. In summary, what's the benefit of this work? Why are we doing this work?
2 reasons. The first reason is performance. We get the ability to spread, use a more efficient API that can spread work over all of your CPU cores, which will result in a much faster rendering process on the CPU side and much lower latency as well. Latency is obviously quite important to a lot of people these days. And the second side is because it's a more modern API, it opens the door to many new features that we didn't previously have access to, which are things like ray tracing, VRS, and async compute. And there's a lot of things that we couldn't do locked to the previous API. So performance, then features afterwards.
Gotcha. So it seems like a big part in letting Star Citizen realize its full potential,
Yes.
I guess.
We don't really have a choice. This has to happen. This is the next logical step. We can't really achieve the performance or the visuals we want without taking a step first.
Cool. Want to put a date on it?
No? Do you?
Nope. Just I figured I'd ask. All right, man. Thank you.
It's our biggest focus this year. There's nothing else that we are putting anywhere near as much resources in.
For the graphics team.
For the graphics, oh yeah,
Just
the graphics and engine team, yeah.
Fair enough. All right, Ali, thank you. I think that was great. I think we covered what it is, how it works, and why we're doing it, and couldn't ask for anything more. So thank you so much. I'll let you go.
Thanks a lot.
All right, take
Cheers.
care. All right, so for our next question, we are going to Senior Systems Designer Jeffrey Coffin for a question about the Idris. Jeffrey, how you doing, man?
I'm all right. It's new and different working from home, but I'm progressing.
That's our reality for the moment. Thank you for taking the call. We're going to jump right into this. We have a question about the Idris. Now, players know that the Idris is being introduced into the persistent universe with the upcoming Arlington Bounty series, but that's an NPC-controlled Idris. This question is about the player-facing Idris. Can you give us a status update on where the Idris is in regards to being available for players in the persistent universe?
Yeah, sure. So the exterior of the Idris is mostly there, which is why we're going to be putting it into the PU soon. It's like all the damage is set, or a lot of the damage is set up for it. The exterior outworks, all their thrusters, etc., which is why that can happen. But for the interior, it's still fairly work in progress because Squadron 42, it's very work in progress there still. We need any reworks that go in, any changes to the PCAP or anything need to be updated within the Idris. The interior is still very much in flux, and in addition to all that as well, it's a big multi-crew ship. So as these features get implemented, we need to obviously refine what's present inside the ship. So currently, as it stands, really the ship interior isn't in a state where we can give it to the public, and it probably won't be for a while.
Right. You made a comment there about the Multicrew, and we're going to talk to Dave Coulson here in a little bit about Multicrew gameplay. It can't be understated how important that is to something like the Idris, because the Idris is a capital ship.
Yeah.
Is one person meant to just fly this thing around like a fighter? Is
one person can technically fly it around like a fighter, but you will be getting barely any of the ship's functionality out of it. I mean, your pilot will be able to, fly the ship, but you're supposed to have a navigator who will be navigating where you're going to go to and helping you avoid or go to hotspots. You'll have people manning the air traffic control seats who, if you want to have any ships take off and fly away, or even new ones flying in, you'll need to have someone to manage all that. The pilot can't do all of this on their own. You'll have weapon seats to handle the railgun at the front. Even a captain who, if someone's being belligerent in the crew, might be able to turn around and demote someone on the fly and say, no, you can't do that anymore. So there's a lot of this functionality that is going to be going into the ship, or should be going into the ship, but it's just not there yet. We don't have it ready yet. So essentially what you would have if you were to release the Idris right now is a giant fighter, and that's I don't think most people would appreciate that.
That's fair enough. Talk to me a little bit about the work for the Arlington bounty mission before we let you go. Now it is coming. The exterior the NPC controlled exterior is coming to the Arlington bounty series in Alpha 3.9. How do you balance something like this?
It was really tricky. So initially, before obviously the mission took too much shape, one of the first things that came my way was to actually try to balance the Idris around fighting different amounts of ships. So I'd start spawning hammerhead after hammerhead after hammerhead, and just having tons of hammerheads fighting the ship, and then I'd try out maybe throwing in some retaliators with their torpedoes. And one of the first things we quickly discovered was, with the way the ships are currently set up, they've got a small health pool on multiple parts of the ship, and as you take damage, it'll spread up the ship and eventually go to the core location and then kill the ship. But what happened with one size 9 torpedo is the splash damage would hit so many locations, one would just kill the Idris straight away. So we were immediately right, we need to give this thing a bigger centralized health pool, and then kind of have the other areas have slightly less, just to kind of balance it out. So there was a lot of iteration just on the health of the ship alone, let alone tweaking the shield generators, because this thing's got capital size shield generators like the 890 has, which make it huge and very difficult to damage in the first place. So there was a lot of just sort of base iteration, just making this thing resilient enough to actually require a bunch of people to kill, but not be completely unkillable in the first place.
And I imagine one of the benefits of it going into the Precision universe is that we're going to be able to witness thousands and thousands of players, fighting this thing and taking this on, and getting that data back that will help additional balancing in the future.
Absolutely. These capital ships, they're kind of untested waters as far as obviously gameplay goes. We've had fighters out in the universe for years. We know very well how they work, but for these much larger ships, which you're not supposed to be able to take them out with an individual fighter, so having an Aurora or a Gladius just ram into the Idris and kill it would be a problem. So taking out the players who are a fairly creative bunch, there's probably going to be a lot of interesting ways to kill the Idris that'll get discovered, and we can start trying to work around whatever gets discovered out there. It's going to be interesting, certainly.
You're looking forward to seeing it in action?
I am. It's every ship I work on, you get that sense of pride for it. You really want it to do well. Even I worked on the Argo Empov, and that's just, it's a dinky little runabout, but I'm still really proud of it. And this ship it's huge. I've been working on this one for years, so I'm really looking forward to it actually getting to go out there. And even if the players can't fly it, they can at least blow it up.
Well, we'll see. All right, man. I'll let you go. Thank you so much for taking the time to answer our questions today, man.
Awesome. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Right. See you, man. All right, so last but certainly not least, this question is a biggie, and I think we're going to go to Dave Coulson, gameplay programmer from the Vehicle Feature Team. Dave, how you doing, man?
Pretty good, thanks.
I called you Dave. I know you don't appreciate that. I'm sorry. David.
That's fine. I don't mind. Whatever you like.
All right, we're going to jump right into this. This question from the Star Citizen backer voted up. Is deeper Multicrew gameplay planned?
Yeah, absolutely. Deeper Multicrew gameplay has been planned for, I guess, since the beginning, right? Some interest has been kind of picking up on it recently. We've had some discussions with CR to kind of refine how we're going to go about things. We've been looking into, building this permission system for ships where the captain can assign item control to specific people in the ship. So he can, give the engineer the role to control the power plant and the coolers, and a weapons officer the ability to control weapons, that sort of thing, right? And the hope is that over time, as we add more and more depth of sort of systems gameplay inside the ships, that combined with the permission system will be conducive to more and more deep multi-crew gameplay. Because right now, I think all of the ship control pretty much gets funneled to the pilot, and that's kind of the issue that we want to solve in the near term. and then we'll continue adding depth to make the multi-crew experience more interesting as we keep going, right?
So where does that start? Does that start with the development of the individual game features, like the evolution of power systems and the evolution of components and subcomponents and stuff? Like, break the process out for us. How this comes to life. It starts with game systems, I imagine.
Yeah, it starts with game systems. It's one of those things that, like, we don't want to have this like very artificial feeling. Oh, this is what you do if you're this role, and if you're a weapons officer, this is your screen and it's designed for weapon ops. We want it to feel a little bit more natural, where players can come up with these roles themselves. But what we need to do is we need to consider how the gameplay systems in the ship interact with each other, and more importantly, how players interact with them, so that when they get combined together, the natural result will be, roles like you see in like, a stereotypical multi-crew spaceship. And so that's pretty much what we're doing now, is like reviewing a lot of ship systems and trying to see what we can do to increase the depth and make it interesting for players to engage with those systems. And then obviously, longer term is adding more features to ships. I think that's probably a discussion for another calling all devs.
Are we talking like mini games or quick time events? How does this manifest to the player? Like, let's just take something like an engineer for an example. If I'm playing an engineer, am I going to be sitting here going boop beep beep, playing Simon Says, booping, and then the thing is magically fixed?
No. We don't want mini games. We don't want quick time events. As I said, it needs to feel natural. It needs to feel like this is the obvious thing for that player to do. So take engineer, for example. The way an engineer might go about things is, if we increase the sort of interaction inside ships, if you have, maybe we have like life support inside the ship is failing and you've run out of oxygen or something like that, the engineer might have to walk over to a panel that has an oxygen bottle. They have to open the panel, go inside, get this oxygen bottle out, do some actions to repair it. I'm not exactly sure how they'll work. We haven't fleshed that out quite yet. And then they'll go back and put that back in and make sure it's working. And so that's the kind of thing where it's not mini games for a role. It's actions that interact with the ship systems, and then players. Yes. Physicalized, some of them are physicalized, right? Like that one is obviously physicalized. But like, for example, scanning for stuff is probably not physicalized. It's going to be something where you're at a scanning station with like a globe that shows you nearby contacts on the radar, and that sort of thing. It'll depend a little bit on what the feature is as to how it'll manifest in the ship. But obviously we want some kind of variety. So
and the specific capabilities of that ship, because not every ship has a giant globe.
Yeah, obviously, yeah. So. Yeah, so like, for example, a ship that has a med bed might have more sort of gameplay for a medical officer, whereas ships that don't, that won't be applicable. But yeah, absolutely.
Gotcha. You said you recently just had a meeting with CR. This is a topic of conversation that's current right now. Did you come out of that with any particular roles that we're looking at, that we're considering?
Yeah, so captain obviously is the biggest, most interesting one. The captain, first and foremost, has this ability to assign permissions to players, but the captain also we view as kind of like, being a captain is kind of like playing a real-time strategy game, where you say you will be able to see what's going on in the nearby like battlefield, say if you're in a battle, through the globe, and then the captain is like, pointing things out and giving orders to various people on the ship, and trying to direct how things are progressing while you're playing the game. And that's that's the captain. That's the first role, and how we kind of see what their actions are. Pilot obviously is pretty much already defined. Engineer is a big one. This is going to be, when we get to increasing the depth of the power systems inside large ships, the engineer will be, naturally suited to that kind of role. There's also like security officers, which say can control door access and that sort of thing.
I played Gyromite.
Yeah, I've not played Gyromite.
yeah,
I'm one of those
before
Jared.
Never mind.
Before my
Us
time as a-
old people will know what I'm talking about. Continue.
Fair enough. Yeah, so I think those are probably like core pillars, right? So you've got like engineer, captain, pilot, and then probably like tactical officer, or I don't know what you would call the person who's looking after scanning and radar. Is that tactical officer? I'm not quite so sure.
Maybe, yeah. Or science officer if you're not if it's not
science.
battle, for instance.
Exactly, yeah. I think those are the main roles, and then I think there might be specific roles for certain ships depending on their feature set, and players can also just define their own roles if they want. It's not up to us. If they want to give players give a certain player a specific set of items to control, they can make up that role however they want.
I think that's a big part of this. I don't want to bury the lead there. It's less about us designating the types of roles that players will be able to assume on a ship, and more about providing people the tools and the systemic ability
Absolutely.
to create their own roles.
Absolutely. I think that's a much more interesting gameplay prospect, and it's definitely what Chris has always wanted for Multicrew. And this is why interest in this is like picking up for us at the moment, because we want to help the players define these roles a little bit better, and give those roles something to do. But I think that will result in the most interesting and varied Multicrew experience, rather than having these like rigidly defined goals.
Gotcha. So it sounds like, before I let you go, just to make sure I kind of understand not necessarily a timeline, but a flow here. It's developing the individual ship systems, like power, like scanning, like making scanning more robust, making power management more robust, making components and component systems damage and stuff more robust. Developing those individual systems, and then it's finding a way to assign permissions to manage those systems and stuff.
Pretty much, yeah.
And then from there, players will have the tools necessary to create their own rules on ships.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the order of when things are come is not exactly known. It may be that the ability to assign permissions is something that we end up doing sooner rather than later, just because of how core that is to that experience. Because right now, as I said, just assigning all the permissions to a specific player ruins a lot of this, right? So yeah, and then obviously increasing the depth of the features is going to be an ongoing process.
Gotcha. Cool, man. I think that's it. I think that's a pretty good update. We haven't been able to update on this topic for a while, so I appreciate it, especially since
Cool.
you just had the meeting with CR recently about it. So, yeah, I'll let you go, man.
All right, see you, Jared.
Thank you. We'll see you again. All right, well, that wraps up this episode of Calling All Devs. I want to thank Allie Brown, Jeffrey Coffin, and Dave Coulson for taking time out of their schedule to answer our questions for us this episode. Remember that you can submit your questions for consideration up on Spectrum, which is the communication platform available on robertspaceindustries.com, and you can vote to see which questions you want to see addressed most. For Calling All Devs, I'm Jared Huckabee. We'll see you next time.